the scream that started it all wasn't heard outside the walls of Pelican Bay. It was swallowed by concrete, by distance, and by silence, the kind that prisons are built to protect. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. In 1995, the gates of Pelican Bay State Prison in Crescent City, California, didn't just keep men in, they kept secrets buried deep inside. On paper, it was a Supermax, designed to hold the state's most violent offenders. In reality, it was something else, a world engineered for control, where light, sound, and hope were all rationed. Inside the security housing unit, the SHU, men lived in isolation so complete that they forgot what real voices sounded like. 23 hours a day, alone in a concrete cell, with a steel door that never opened except for food trays or handcuffs. The administration called it security. The inmates called it slow death. Rumors had already started to leak out: beatings during cell extractions, men dragged across floors, guards laughing while others screamed. Letters smuggled out through lawyers spoke of gladiator fights, inmates forced into cages and set against one another for sport. But no one on the outside wanted to believe it. Not yet. Then came the night of February 1995. A noise erupted from the SHU corridor, a crash, then shouting, then silence again. When dawn came, one inmate was missing. His name was William Martinez. Officially, he had resisted officers and collapsed due to exhaustion. Unofficially, whispers said otherwise. That he'd been beaten. That something went too far. That guards had tried to cover it up. For years, Pelican Bay's officers had been accused of handling things internally. But now, reporters were circling. Lawyers were calling. Even the Department of Justice had started to take notes. Inmates wrote affidavits from their cells, describing what they'd seen and heard, details that painted a pattern of systematic abuse. The kind that couldn't be written off as a few bad apples. But inside the prison, those who talked didn't stay safe for long. One inmate who'd spoken to an attorney found himself transferred to a disciplinary cell. Another simply disappeared from the yard rotation logs. By spring, the rumors had become something larger, a federal investigation. For the first time, the US government was stepping inside Pelican Bay's walls, not as visitors, but as witnesses. And behind every door, the inmates knew what that meant. Some saw hope. Others saw danger. Because when outsiders start asking questions in a place built on silence, someone always pays the price. The doors of the SHU clanged shut one last time that night, the sound echoing down the corridor like a warning. Something was coming for Pelican Bay, and it wouldn't stay quiet for long. The investigation began quietly, just a few men in suits, clipboards in hand, walking through corridors that smelled of bleach and fear. But in a place like Pelican Bay, even whispers traveled faster than light. The inmates called it the feds. The officers called it trouble. By March 1995, tension was thick enough to taste. Everyone knew that what was buried under those layers of concrete was about to surface. The Department of Justice had opened a formal civil rights investigation, one that threatened to expose the unspoken rules that govern the most feared prison in California. They interviewed staff, combed through medical reports, and reviewed surveillance logs that somehow never showed what inmates described. Each missing second of footage felt like a secret sealed by design. But the truth had already found its way out, through a man named Michael Vaughn, a former correctional officer who'd turned whistleblower. He'd seen things: an officer breaking a prisoner's ribs during a cell extraction, a sergeant laughing as another inmate was left naked in freezing temperatures overnight. He told investigators that Pelican Bay was not a prison, it was a laboratory of cruelty. When word of his cooperation spread, guards grew colder. The Brotherhood of Silence, the Green Wall, as they called it, began to tighten. Anyone who talked risked exile within their own ranks. Vaughn received threats, his car vandalized, and his family's phone line cut. Still, he didn't back down. Meanwhile, inmates felt the pressure from the other side. Many believed the investigation would bring justice. But inside the SHU, justice was a fantasy. guards allegedly punished snitches by planting weapons, staging fights, or cutting yard time to zero. Letters intercepted by lawyers described how one prisoner, identified only as D103, had been denied medical attention after being slammed into a wall. He wrote, "If the feds don't stop them, we'll disappear one by one." Federal investigators noticed something strange: medical files missing pages, grievance forms marked as resolved without signatures, and incident reports rewritten in identical language, as if copied from a template. The deeper they looked, the more the paper trail smelled of manipulation. But the prison administration stood firm. Warden Carl Maddox, a man known for his rigid authority, dismissed the allegations as exaggerations from violent men who hate control. In press statements, he called Pelican Bay a model of modern corrections. Yet behind closed doors, even Maddox couldn't ignore the pressure. Sacramento wanted answers. Washington wanted accountability. And his own officers wanted loyalty, not transparency. In May, a confidential memo leaked, an internal warning from DOJ lawyers describing credible evidence of excessive force and deliberate indifference. The words sent shockwaves through California's correctional ranks. For the first time, the men who ruled Pelican Bay were being watched. But when the federal team requested to revisit the SHU unannounced, something unexpected happened. Access was suddenly restricted for maintenance. The timing was too perfect. Someone was cleaning house, not with mops, but with fear. And just as the investigation reached its peak, an anonymous package arrived at the DOJ office in San Francisco. Inside were undeveloped rolls of film, grainy, distorted, but clear enough to see what words couldn't describe. The photos showed what looked like a small concrete room. Blood on the floor. Shackles on the wall. A prisoner slumped against it, eyes half open. No timestamp. No names. No proof, yet. But it was enough to make the investigators realize that Pelican Bay's secrets weren't just stories whispered through vents. They were evidence. Evidence someone was willing to kill for. The photos changed everything. When federal investigators returned to Pelican Bay in July 1995, the prison's calm veneer had cracked. The warden tried to stall, but Washington had authorized full access, including to the SHU. For the first time, outsiders walked those silent tiers where men hadn't spoken to another human face in years. The corridors felt colder now, as if the building itself knew it was being watched. Every step echoed off the concrete, bouncing between cells like trapped ghosts of the past. Inmates pressed their faces to the slots, whispering, "Are they here for us?" Inside one isolation cell, the investigators found evidence that confirmed what the photos suggested: dried stains on the floor, a broken restraint chain, a patch of wall where paint had been scrubbed raw. The officer escorting them claimed it was from an old incident, long resolved. But the smell of bleach still hung heavy in the air. The investigation expanded. Dozens of inmates gave sworn statements, describing beatings disguised as compliance procedures. They spoke of cold showers used as punishment, of officers who switched name tags to confuse accountability, of an unspoken rule: don't bleed where cameras can see. Meanwhile, the guards closed ranks. The green wall became an invisible shield, stretching from Pelican Bay to Sacramento. Files disappeared overnight. Witnesses recanted. A sergeant who'd agreed to testify found his locker ransacked, and a note inside: "You talk, you're next." But truth has a way of surviving even in darkness. In late August, a young DOJ attorney named Carla Jensen discovered a sealed envelope in a case file labeled "Use of Force, Confidential." Inside were handwritten reports, unsigned, detailing multiple incidents of abuse, including one matching the night William Martinez died. The handwriting didn't match any official staff member, but one line stood out: "We went too far. He wasn't supposed to die." That sentence became the pivot point. By October 1995, the federal government released its findings, a 200-page report declaring that Pelican Bay State Prison had violated the constitutional rights of inmates through excessive force, psychological abuse, and deliberate neglect. It was the first time a U.S. Supermax had been publicly accused of systemic torture. The state denied everything. Officials promised reform, but inside, little changed overnight. The SHU remained cold. The lights stayed dim. The silence, unbroken. Still, something had shifted, not in policy, but in perception. America had looked inside its most secretive prison and seen the cost of control. Years later, when reporters asked one of the investigators what haunted him most, he didn't mention the photos or the files. He said it was the sound, the echo of the steel doors closing behind him when he left the SHU. Because, he said, it reminded me that some people never get to walk back out. The whistleblower, Michael Vaughn, vanished from public life soon after testifying. His address was redacted from all court documents. Some say he changed his name, others believe he couldn't live with what he'd seen. And the inmates who spoke out. Many were transferred to other facilities, scattered across the system like pieces of a story no one wanted to remember. But the report stayed, archived, public, undeniable. Proof that for a moment in 1995, the truth had broken through the walls of Pelican Bay. The concrete still stands. The cells are still there. And so are the echoes. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.